Oh, thank God you're here. I have been so bored. So now that you're here, we can get down to business. Today, I am talking about Season 2, Episode 7, Unnatural Selection. Now, this is an episode that is not very memorable in any way. However, it does have a couple good things going for it. So in this episode, the USS Enterprise receives a distress call from a Federation ship. When they get there, they discover that everyone has died of old age. And it doesn't make any sense because they weren't supposed to be that old. They discover that the ship has recently left a genetic research station. So they travel there and they find that the people at the station are afflicted with the same unnatural aging. So Dr. Pulaski starts to investigate, and the people at the station tell her that they're working on genetically engineered children. And Pulaski wants to beam one of them to the Enterprise, so they take precautions, they put up a force field, they encase the child in some kind of, thing that it never really explains what it is, but it's like a clear shell to keep them from transmitting the disease. So she beams them on board. She doesn't notice any sign of the disease, so she convinces Picard to let her take the child and Data onto a shuttlecraft to take him out of stasis so that she can run tests. Almost immediately, she starts noticing signs of aging, so it turns out that the kids are infected or at least carriers. They go back to the research station, which has been quarantined, and they start investigating. Data then discovers that the cause of the disease is the fact that someone on the USS Lantry, which is the ship that the Enterprise discovered, had a form of flu. Now these children's immune systems are designed to go out of the body and attack any disease that it encounters before they get a chance to be infected. But in attacking the flu disease, modified it to the point that it could modify human DNA and make them age rapidly, and it never really explains or helps us understand why that's a thing, but we're just supposed to go with it. So at this point, Pulaski's about to die because she's like 80 years old, and Picard's desperately trying to find a solution. So he talks to O'Brien, which O'Brien is in this episode, so, that's a plus. I like me some Miles O'Brien. And they realize that they can program the transporter to use a sample of Pulaski's DNA from before she was aged to modify her existing DNA to make it so that she de-ages. The problem is that Pulaski hates transporters, and so she hasn't used one since she's been on the Enterprise, but they're able to find a sample of her DNA in the follicle of a hair from her hairbrush in her quarters. They program that into the transporter buffer beam thing, and they de-age her, and then they're able to do that with everyone on the station. So hooray, they're saved. The kids are going to have to live out their life in total isolation, which, sucks because they're apparently going to kill everyone they come into contact with. But hey, we saved Pulaski and the scientists. So, a couple things about this episode. Genetic engineering is supposed to be illegal. We went through the whole eugenics thing with Khan, and it's never quite clear if that was eugenics or genetic engineering because they kind of changed that throughout the series. But later on, we have the whole thing with Dr. Bashir in Deep Space Nine, where we find out that he's genetically engineered and that genetically engineering is strictly prohibited by the Federation. But in this episode, they're like, yeah, we modified these children, and they're telepathic, and they have telekinesis. And this 12-year-old boy looks like a grown adult for no reason, and they live in this tiny room moving chess pieces around with their minds. That should be illegal. Later on, when Data creates his daughter, Lol, the Federation is all like, we gotta oversee this, you can't just create a new life form, but they're genetically creating children. That should be illegal. And apparently they later established that it is illegal, and this episode is just kind of ignored. So that's one sticking point. It's just kind of weird. So another thing in this episode is at the beginning, Captain Picard is talking to Deanna Troi, and he's discussing Dr. Pulaski, because Dr. Pulaski is still relatively new at this point. This is the 7th episode with her in it. She's still kind of integrating into the crew. And he's like asking Counselor Troy her opinions of Pulaski because Troy and Pulaski have become friends apparently at this point. And she says that, she's dedicated, she's passionate, and Picard seems kind of skeptical, thinking that her passion might get in the way. And continuously throughout the episode, they are butting heads because Pulaski wants to bring the kid on board, Picard's concerned about the safety of the crew, Pulaski wants to take the kid out on a shuttlecraft. Picard eventually concedes, but they have some kind of fights about it. So, it's kind of interesting because I think that they're trying to develop Pulaski's place in the crew, and they're trying to establish the fact that, like, she is kind of this hard-headed woman, because she's supposed to kind of take after Bones in the original series, but they want to establish that she can still get along with the crew and that they still accept her. So I actually think that they do a good job with that. This episode also has a lot of her interactions with Data. My hands are just everywhere. Because she goes onto the shuttlecraft with him, and then he ends up on the station with her whenever she's dying. And they have some good interactions, because at the beginning they made her kind of prejudiced towards Data. Not in, like, an intentional way, but kind of in a, like, oh, he's a machine, he doesn't have emotions, he's not creative, he doesn't have feelings. And they're going for, I think, the relationship between Bones and Spock, but it just doesn't come off quite as well. And I've discussed this before because it feels like she's just bullying Data. And you feel bad for him. And I think in this one they may have realized that and they pulled back on it a little bit. And they show some more sincere interaction between them, and they show that respect that has developed in both directions. So I think that that's a really good point for this episode. My door is slowly opening, which is kind of obnoxious. So this is Dale, my boyfriend, and he's got an opinion like every other nerd. So Dale, what did you think of this episode?
So we're talking about the one where they're doing genetic engineering and it goes terribly wrong like everything else.
Yeah, and Pulaski gets really old and almost dies, and it should be illegal.
Well, I mean, technically it is, because didn't Enterprise make an episode? Well, wait, hold on, no.
That had Soon with the kids that he augmented, yeah.
But I mean, he was really pushing that genetic engineering angle, wasn't he?
But then he realized that wasn't feasible, and that's kind of when the Soon dynasty started getting into cybernetics and positronic brains and stuff. But yeah, the whole history of genetic engineering in Star Trek is really muddled. It's not very consistent. So that's kind of interesting. But why do you feel about the relationship between Pulaski and Data?
I really feel like Pulaski just didn't really care about Data, because she called him Data.
Yeah, that was, I think, the first episode that she was in.
The funny thing about that is the whole Data thing, because you gotta remember, like, this is the late 80s when they're starting to talk about actual data, and everyone was calling it data. So, Star Trek was actually the motivating force that changed things around, so that way in popular culture people would say data instead of data.
That's interesting, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm filled with all sorts of useful facts and information.
Yeah.
But I mean, I feel like Pulaski just didn't care about Data to even try to bother learning his name. And then at the end of the episode, she, develops this new great respect for Data and everything.
Yeah, I think that, like I was saying, this is the 7th episode in this season, so Pulaski is kind of getting integrated into the crew. And I think that the respect between her and Data has been steadily growing, because there's actually been a couple episodes where they have more of an interaction, and you can tell that she's starting to realize, he is a person. And I think that's good character growth, because I think that if she had maintained that same level of prejudice against him, that would have just made her an unlikable character. It wouldn't have made her, like, quirky or tough. It just would have made her unlikable. So I think that it's good that they slowly build up a form of, like, a working relationship between the two.
I'm just going to come out and say it. I like Pulaski more than Crusher.
Really?
Yeah, I do.
She definitely has a strong personality.
Well, I feel like the only reason why they kept Crusher was because they needed to give Picard a love interest, or at least, build that some kind of chemistry. I mean, I don't really know the story behind Gates McFadden, who played Crusher, you know, leaving the show.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about that.
And then she just like popped back in because I mean, remember when we were on the couch watching the Tasha Yar episode where she dies, and then we were like delving into like all the crazy that went on with that.
Yeah,
and it briefly mentions Gates McFadden and, you know, stuff that she was doing, but
yeah, I think it's good that Crusher came back because I do like her, but it would have been interesting to see how they evolved Pulaski's character, because I feel like she's a much tougher character, I guess, than Beverly is. Like, she's much more her own person as opposed to Dr. Crusher, who never really gets like really good character development.
Well, I think we could put this in the no BS factor, because there's certain, you know, character types that, you know, they have on the show. Like, all of the shows have the no BS factor character. So, say, for example, we have Worf, and then we have Picard, and then we have, well, Data's kind of 50-50 because when he's exploring his new emotion nonsense or something like that.
Data doesn't know what's going on half the time.
And I feel like as the seasons progress, Geordi goes into the no BS factor as well. But Crusher was the exact opposite of the no BS factor, because she's like always trying to like humanize things and learn things and whatnot. And Pulaski was straight up like, yeah, so like Pulaski reminds me of like the crusty Master Sergeant, like Miles O'Brien. Hey, we love Miles. And she just clashed. I think that's probably what the producers thought. They thought she clashed too much and they wanted...
I think that Crusher and Troy have a better relationship because, like you said, Crusher is a lot more empathetic, whereas Pulaski, like, she cares about her patients, but she is a lot tougher. And I think that Crusher and Troy have a much better dynamic, and you need someone for Troy to kind of have, like, girl time with, and Pulaski doesn't provide that.
Well, I mean, didn't we see that awkward scene where...
Yeah, the yoga episode.
Yeah,
that's coming up in season 3, so we're going to talk about that when we hit that.
I honestly feel like we should just be sitting by our fireplace just watching that scene on repeat, like, well, look at Star Trek The Next Generation going to the creepy factor.
It's pretty creepy.
Well,
but I'm going to cut this off now because we're getting into a pretty long episode here. But thank you, Dale, for guest starring on The Quark Star. And we'll have him coming up in a couple episodes, including doing an Earl Grey tea testing.
Yeah.
So,
while you guys do this, I'm going to go watch DS9, the better series.
He's not a true believer.
Hey, man.
So that was Dale, and he crashed this video, but he will be appearing in future videos for actual planned appearances. So it'll be kind of fun to have someone to interact with and play off of in these videos and get a separate opinion. So I'm looking forward to that.